All right, here we go. So this panel, well, initially it was going to be a panel. We were going to have Bernard from BitNob join us, but unfortunately Bernard couldn't make it, so it's just going to be me and Albert today. We're going to chat a little bit about, what his a bit of his entrepreneurial journey, what he's working on with Neutronpay, and the hopes for Lightning adoption. So, just for people who don't know, do you want to just give us a little bit of a background on yourself and where you came from before Neutronpay?
So before Neutronpay, I was in the fintech industry. So I worked at Hyperwallet, which is a mass payouts company. So they paid out to 190 countries. And so you can think of their model as if it was like Uber, they would have to go pay out their contractors or affiliates. And these affiliates and contractors can be in obviously multiple countries. And so they would pay us a lump sum and we'd go distribute that out to all the contractors and affiliates into these different countries. So that got bought out by PayPal. And so I was working there for about 3 years. And then just prior to that, there's a bunch of other fintech companies, but not as big as Hyperwallet. And so when I was working at Hyperwallet, just kind of working with Bitcoin at the same time, so I had a couple businesses in Bitcoin. We had the second and third ATMs in the world brought to Vancouver. The first guy beat me to the shipment, and he got the first one. So the first one was actually in Vancouver. Ran that for a bit, sold it, went into mining. And then when Lightning came around, was reading up on that ever since like 2015, 2016 when it was released. And then while working at Hyperwallet, I just figured out, hey, these two segments really complement each other really well. And so that's where kind of Neutronpay started.
Awesome. And so Lightning, for many people, it represented this new hope that we could actually do day-to-day commerce, right? Because and for people who've been around, I think people in the earlier years used to just do everything on chain, but obviously, people knew that wasn't going to scale, right? So, tell us a little bit about what your experience was with Lightning in the early days, and what got you excited about Lightning?
Yeah, the early days was really interesting. I think Wallace Satoshi can talk to this too as well. There was only a few participants on the network, and kind of everyone was still on the whole, layer one can do everything. But there was an issue, right? Like scalability was really an issue on Bitcoin, right? Because even the 10-minute segment and just having it kind of used as a global payment service wasn't effective as what people would want it to do, right? It's funny because 10 minutes is actually pretty quick, right? So if you look at kind of what we do in the traditional banking systems, if you want to do anything from like a global remittance standpoint, it takes like 3 to 5 days, which is pretty long. And then now people are complaining that 10 minutes is too long. And so when Lightning kind of came in to fill that gap, to say that we need a scalable solution like layer 2, it made a lot of sense. And so I think just that being able to provide the needs of what people would want is kind of in a general aspect of people is they just want, it's not gratification, but they want things that are instant, right? So because we're so used to the internet, we see video right away, we see text right away. And so the only thing that's really missing is, how we receive our money. And so we don't receive that instantly. What we do now because of Lightning, and obviously it's kind of a niche area, but it's growing, is that, eventually as this grows a little bit larger, is that now people will have all aspects of what we do online is very instant. So I think that Lightning is a very good method for obviously just kind of receiving globally. I don't think it's really good for local stuff, but for bringing countries together, I think it's a very good method to use, right? So there'll be other counter arguments to it, like obviously because people will say it looks a little bit like a hub and spoke really, because as the nodes kind of get bigger and people say, well, does their participants kind of get squashed out, or do the bigger nodes just kind of take over everything? And I don't think that's a fact. Like I think, really quick on this segment is I think Lightning will effectively be kind of like how mining was. So if you were in the Bitcoin mining space way back in the day, is that we had this huge kind of uplift on mining, right? And there's a bunch of these, it started off with hobbyists, and there was a bunch of larger organizations that got into mining. And then we had this problem where there was like mining centralization, and then it kind of just died off, and then everything just started dispersing out into other kind of corporations. And so now you see mining kind of as a little bit flattened out. And I think Lightning will do the same thing, is that we'll have this exponential growth with a bunch of huge, large node operators. And then eventually it'll just start kind of flattening out where everyone will have a piece of the Lightning Network and participate into it.
And I think it's important to point out because a lot of people in, let's say, broader quote-unquote crypto world, as much as I dislike that term, a lot of people think they've got instant payments, but really what they're doing is they're just doing zero confirmation with some altcoin, right? And it's just not the same from a security point of view. I think it is worthwhile understanding that difference, right? So for example, with Lightning, the amount is set, and you don't have these kind of overpayment or underpayment problems that you do with on-chain commerce, especially if the price is moving around. And I think that's, it's an interesting thing because Lightning can really enable internet commerce in a way, and also day-to-day commerce, as we've seen, right? You can go out and buy a coffee with Lightning, you can buy food with Lightning. So I think it's an important aspect there. So do you want to just tell us a little bit, if you could just give us a bit of an overview, what's Neutronpay trying to achieve?
Yeah, so Neutronpay is trying to achieve the ability for bringing global payments closer together, so instant and real-time payments. And so the first kind of segment that we wanted to focus on was obviously in the Vietnamese community. Like my background is Vietnamese, and so bringing it home to Vietnam and kind of bringing the ability to pay back to, say, like a family member that's in the US or Canada was kind of the main purpose of it. And obviously there's other scalability things that we could do with that, but the main purpose was just to make sure we're targeting the Vietnamese community. Because we believe that if we could do that for the Vietnamese community, that we'd be able to send money back and home, remitting from the US to Vietnam or from Vietnam to the US, is that we can easily put this blueprint into, say, different cultures, right? Like South Korea, Thailand, Indonesia, right? So you can kind of see how this really scales up pretty large. So that was kind of the purpose of the company, was to make sure that, bringing, I'd like to always say like bringing countries closer together, but it's more or less bringing people closer together, right? Because a lot of people would say, the way people look at money is, kind of in a bad way, but if you really think about money, it's people are romantic with their money, right? So who you send it to and who you receive it from, there's always a particular meaning. And if you can make that a lot quicker in the ways of using Lightning, that kind of brings a relationship closer is what I think. And so with Neutronpay, we're trying to make sure that that's easily accessible, obviously in Vietnam with Neutronpay in the app, and then hopefully tying in with other Lightning providers that are all over the world. Like examples like Cash App in the US now can send back payments into Vietnam, and we can send back to the US. And it's the same thing with Wallet Satoshi, right? So now we can have payments being received from them, and their users or wherever in the world, they can send money back to Vietnam, and we can send money to Wallet Satoshi. So that's kind of just what we're looking at to make sure that we can provide a global instant, payment rail that's much faster than, the traditional banking rails that we have, which is like Wire, Swift, and SEPA.
So let's walk through just an example. So let's say there's a Vietnamese person in Canada, and they've got family back in Vietnam, and they've got let's say their Canadian dollars that they're earning in their salary in Canada. Can you just walk us through what does that look like for that person to send money back to Vietnam?
Yeah. So in Canada, it would be very similar to, so maybe I'll start in the Vietnam sector. So the Vietnam has a lot of these payment apps where you could just kind of download it on, any iOS or Android store, and then you would just connect your bank account, and you would kind of load it up, so you top it up, so you'd receive, say for example, 100,000 VND, and what you would do is then you would just kind of, on the other person on the other side, if they had a Lightning wallet or they're using Neutronpay, is you just scan that QR code and it would send that amount of money across instantly using the Lightning network and then convert it into Canadian dollars. And so you can imagine that would be vice versa, where if a Canadian user was going to use it, they'd just top up on their account side, send it over, and then the person on the other receiving side would receive VND. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that the general public doesn't really need to know what Lightning is. Obviously, we'd love to promote it a lot. It's just as soon as you start introducing technology and telling them this is the Lightning, this is Bitcoin, this is what it does, people tend to lose obviously the kind of interest in kind of how that's being done. And so we wanted to try to provide actually how easy it would be from point A to point B. And so hopefully with Neutronpay being able to do that's what we wanted to allow people to accomplish.
So maybe we could summarize it like you're trying to help give them that experience without necessarily exposing all the Bitcoin and Sats aspect, right? So from their point of view, they're just changing the Canadian dollars to VND. That's kind of in their mind what's happening. But really in the background, obviously it's using Lightning and Bitcoin and all this stuff. And so also there's a merchant payment processing aspect. Can you explain a little bit what you're doing there?
Yeah, so we have another product that is, so we have two. So we have an enterprise API that would tie into a lot of the businesses. So anyone that's SMB or SME would want to plug in and use our infrastructure and the liquidity that we have. So that would be more or less for if you're a larger platform and wanted to pull in Lightning as a pay-in or payout service. And so how that would particularly work would be, is if you're a larger client and you want to provide, say, value to your customers that you already have on your platform, they could essentially buy the Bitcoin from our APIs, and then we can send it out through the Lightning. Or you can have it as a receiving as Lightning, and it would be instantly converted into, say, US dollars, if they had that on currency side. So that's kind of our enterprise API side. We have also our payment portal, which was kind of our very first product that we created, and that was more for like e-commerce. And so you can think of anything like Shopify or WooCommerce, OpenCart, Magento, the plugins where you could just be able to pay with Bitcoin Lightning at the checkout service line. So those are kind of our two main products.
Yeah, so then part of that is obviously because you're powering some of the payments. As an example, that's where merchants here in Vietnam or elsewhere around the world can be taking Lightning payment, and then you're paying out for them because they need fiat. You're giving them fiat payouts, and of course, I presume over time, what you might see as well is they might start taking payments in fiat, and then eventually they might start even wanting to keep a little bit of Bitcoin as well. Like if that's the journey that people go down, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So eventually, we'd want to have it with bigger businesses, and so kind of like what I mentioned maybe yesterday, if you might have missed it, is we're looking at more of like a top-down approach, and so we wanted to go to the businesses where they have the users and the customers, and have that option for them to say, hey, I'd want to maybe have a portion of my, say, pay into Bitcoin. I want to maybe allocate 10%, and I want to shoot it over the Lightning Network. And so that kind of for us would be shooting up from that top-down approach, because now they have actually had some Bitcoin, they've had some experience with Lightning. Maybe they do want to keep it in Satoshis, or maybe they want to send it to a wallet that would actually convert it into currency, kind of like ourselves, or say like Cash App, or anyone else that does the same thing like Bitnob, right? So Bitnob does the same thing. Is like if we were to send a payment to say Bitnob's app, they would get Nigerian Naira instantly converted, right? And then they can move that instantly into their bank accounts over there. So that I think is more effective, and that's why we're trying to do that. So slowly, if people get comfortable with what they're using or receiving, which is like their currency, but then they understand, hey, well, I also have the option to also maybe keep that as Bitcoin or sats, they can maybe move a portion of that into maybe their savings instead of actually converting it into a currency.
And just from watching Daniel from Wallet of Satoshi's talk and his comments around Lightning Address, I'm curious if you're thinking in a similar way, or how are you seeing Lightning Address as is that going to be something useful to have like a contact list and that kind of aspect?
Yeah, no, I think that's very valuable. I think the Lightning Address is a very good piece to LNURL. It helps with, like Daniel said, is human readable. I think people relate to it, and that's what's really important, right? Because if you can have something that's very relatable to the public, they're more willing to use it, right? Because I think now, like in the Bitcoin space, if you're looking at any addressing type or string, even like a perfect example is like Nostra, right? Like Nostra has like, hey, if you want to sign up, you got to get this, private key and public key, right? And so that just throws off the public altogether. And so just having LNURL is a very huge leap and help for just a Lightning subnet altogether. And I think for us, we want to eventually do the Lightning addresses as well to make it human readable, and obviously to connect with other Lightning companies as well. So yeah, I think that's a very useful feature. Yeah.
And so coming back to the remittance idea and related, is this idea of getting into the communities, I suppose, because obviously if you're Vietnamese, you can maybe find other Vietnamese communities and maybe introduce Bitcoin and Lightning to them in that way. So is that going to be part of the approach, is to try to get Lightning and get the product rather in front of Vietnamese communities to get things started, and then eventually move into other communities?
Yeah. So exactly, like we're trying to. So from a cultural perspective, from Asia, Asian communities really like to talk internally, right? So it's like family oriented, and I think this too, Stephan Livera, is like when you have family in the Asian culture is if you have verified it and you use it, you'll tell your family member, whether it be like your mom, your dad, your cousin, your dad, and your grandpa, like through the whole family, and then that spreads to like your cousins and your distant cousins. And so having that kind of approach to go in Southeast Asia and do it that way is kind of more validating, because now you have people that are actually using it and saying, hey, this is actually a tool that you can use, or it's a utility that you can use for payments that's trusted by a bunch of family members. And I think going down that route, instead of just doing the regular marketing and saying, hey, you should use it because XYZ, lower fees or whatever it is, that's also effective. But I think when you actually hear from someone who's actually within your circle, I guess that what people would say, or within your family, they're more willing to try it and use it. And so I think our approach to that ever since coming into Vietnam has been very effective. I think reaching out to those businesses and family members have actually tried to go and send payments globally or receiving it back for whether it be remittance or any type of business segment, right? So for Canadians, like where I'm from, there's still a lot of product that's being purchased from Vietnam, right? So from manufacturing and supplying. And that kind of purchasing back here is still kind of cumbersome from Canada to here. Like a wire takes about 5 to 7 days. The merchant's not going to release it until they receive it. They'll hold on to it for a few days before they want to do anything, right? And so having kind of that lightning aspect to kind of be able to do that instantly, and then being validated by a family member and saying, hey, don't worry, I use this. It's worked for me. I've transferred it. I've received it, regardless of whatever the size of the money is. But that has validated like kind of the use and why people would want to use it. And so that's kind of helped us in kind of how we're progressing it from regular retail to a little bit more to business. It's just validating through your inner circles.
On the remittance side, can you give us an idea what kind of fees are involved, and how does that compare to, let's say, a typical wire fee or something else that they would be otherwise using?
Yeah, so we usually try to base our fees underneath 2%. And so what we've seen is with the larger companies, like, for example, a good example is like Wise, right? So Wise uses a lot of the legacy banking infrastructure. And so from what I've seen and what we've done in like statistically is that companies like that cannot go under 2%. And the reason why is because they have to pay for the legacy infrastructure, obviously the staff, security, everything else that comes with kind of legacy banking, is that they could probably go under 2%, but then they'll start bleeding, but for how long, right? And so their upper management will say, is it worth us to go maybe break even or bleed just to compete with, say, a Lightning company, right? So for us, like we want to make sure that we're under the 2% completely, and so we usually have a 1% base, and then if we need to go lower, we will go lower. And the reason why we can do that is because the technology is very effective. We don't have to have all this extra overhead that legacy banking has. And so that's kind of our base medium point is we're never going to be above 2%. We leave that for traditional rails and for everything else in banking, and then we try to target obviously as low as we can, but obviously we're a business for profit like everyone else. And so we try to make it as low as possible, and we think that 1% is a good starting point. And we're always willing to go lower to make sure that we can get the people on board onto Lightning and to use it a lot more.
So just, I guess, thinking out loud, let's say a person in Canada wants to send $1,000, then on a 2%, if they were in the fiat world, they might be paying $20, something like that. And then I guess with Neutronpay, they're paying something in the range of $10, let's say, ish.
Yeah, $10-ish, or it could be a little bit lower, just depending on the partners, right? But as we get more volume, like we said, we'd always like to have that lower so that we can attract more customers and users to that. Because I also believe that also in the traditional world, they'll be willing to compete with us on that segment too on pricing, but for how long? That's the thing. So, we could probably survive a little bit longer than they could, meaning that even though they have a larger treasury, they're also a profit for business too, right? And for them to lower their fees to kind of what we've kind of put down and also have that sustainably for a long time while not trying to lose customers and market share, I think is very difficult for them.
And perhaps there's also a benefit there in terms of the speed, obviously, right? Because if you're doing a wire, that's, that could be a week. And I'm sure if anybody here has sent international wires, you've seen how much of a pain it is, how much, how many times things get knocked back because, you didn't fill this form out correctly, or this SWIFT code, or that IBAN, or that, they ask you all these details. So perhaps there's also a reduced friction benefit there, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Because I think everyone has done like a wire before, and just kind of the whole process of itself, kind of going into any type of bank and making sure you have all the information correct. Because even if you have, I think everyone has witnessed this before. As long as if you have the address just wrong by one number, they'll try to send that out, and by the time it comes back, they'll say, hey, it's been sent out, we can't recall it. We have to wait until it fails, come back, and then we can reissue it. And so that is completely, that I think that's a huge advantage of Lightning, because Lightning is pretty simple, just a QR code, and you enter the amount, and it shoots over to the destination and gets settled. So that's where we beat them on the technology side, and kind of the overhead that I was talking about for why they would need to pay for that extra overhead.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of, it reminds me of, in the Lightning context, there's a concept known as stuckless payments, right? And so sometimes there are payments that kind of get stuck in flight. It's kind of rare though, but you kind of have to wait for it to fall back. But in the sense, it's like in the fiat world, you're waiting for that payment to manually fail back, and that can literally be months in the banking and the fiat wire world, that it might have to go through multiple correspondent banks on the way to the final destination. And of course, in Lightning, it's a few seconds, right? Or even less than a second. So can you give us an idea as well on the merchant processing side, what kind of fees people can expect? Like, let's say the coffee shops around Da Nang or wherever, what kind of fees are they expecting, or should they be looking at there?
Yeah, so that's the same thing too. So we're trying to have a base price of just 1% straight across to keep it very simple. And then for the larger businesses, obviously, like for the SMBs and SMEs, there's a different pricing structure that we do there, but usually that's all pretty much dedicated on what type of volume comes in and what we're processing for them.
Excellent. And so I'm curious if you have any stories to tell us in terms of your, when you've been trying to onboard, whether it's a merchant or just people. Do you have any stories to share? I guess maybe we'll talk a little bit about successes and challenges. So maybe do you want to tell us a little bit about if you have any success stories that you've had out there?
Yeah. So, ever since we released our app I think it was probably about 2.5 months ago now, almost 3. So the ability for like a local Vietnamese person, right? So I think I mentioned it a little bit yesterday too, as well as like Vietnam is a population of 100 million people. About 70%, it's getting lower now, but about 70% of them are unbanked, and they don't have the ability to get a credit card. And what that means is they don't have the ability to participate in the online economy, right? And so that kind of removes them completely. And so when we came out with the app, the whole purpose was to kind of show them like, you can now participate online, because most of these people do have bank accounts, but they don't have access to their credit cards. So they can get the banking, but they won't be able to get the credit card, and it's because there's a bunch of rules and certain things that they have to go through before they get it. So now that we've actually enabled them through the Lightning Network to be able to purchase these, to be a part of the online economy, they could just now go buy any gift card, say from like BitRefill, and they can go purchase whatever they want, whether it be from Amazon or say something like Grab or something like that. But a good example would just be Amazon. So now they have the ability to buy something and then ship it back, because Amazon could ship anywhere in the world. Like, they're globally dominant, they have a very good logistics, and they can ship anywhere. So providing kind of a local person to be able to do that, I believe has changed a lot, and we've heard a lot of sentiment and comments back and saying, at first it was a little complicated, but now when they get used to it and they paid it, it's a completely different experience for them, because what they've been taught was, I need to set up a bank account, I need to set up my credit before I can even get a credit card. And some of those people just don't have the ability to say, hey, I only make, the average wage here in Vietnam per month is like $400. And so for you to build up credit on $400 while still trying to live, still trying to buy your expenses, is very difficult, right? And so and on top of that, it's just prices increase, but your wages don't increase. And so that's very difficult for a person to say, I need to get out of this. I don't want to call it like a hole, but it's like a position where it's very difficult to get out if you're only able to conduct within your circle. Meaning, like, if you're completely excluded outside from the internet and you can't participate in that economy for like maybe buying and selling, that kind of leaves you pigeonholed into whatever you're given, and that makes it very difficult, because if you have 100 million people that you're trying to compete with, it's a very difficult time to get out of that. And so if we're able to enable people like that with the app and with Lightning to be able to now say, they can go to one of our top-up locations and say, hey, here's $100. I can top up. We top up into the Neutronpay app. They go buy an e-gift card. They go purchase on something on Amazon. They get it shipped here. And they go resell it for, say, $200. They just made $100 in profit, right? So that's changed a lot of people. That may not be a lot for a lot of people, but for someone who, say, makes only $400 a month, but is able to make an extra $100 that month just because of this ability, I think changes a lot for that person, right? And so they won't take that for granted. Vietnamese people work very hard for a lot of things that they do, and so I think that just alone would help kind of a lot of other people that are in that situation, and also just not in Vietnam, but also like culturally across Southeast Asia, right? Because everyone is in very similar kind of areas where they don't have that opportunity, and maybe they don't have that opportunity to get a credit card, and so now with Lightning and whatever wallet app that they want to use, it gives them that ability to be a part of that economy.
I'm curious whether you see it like most of it will be people just doing things online on apps, or is it also going to be just real world, buying coffees and buying, things in person? Like do you see Lightning is going to be more valuable just because of the frictionless nature of doing things online?
Yeah, I think it's going to be very, very effective. And the reason why is, so I think everyone here knows, like, if you ever transacted with WeChat. So WeChat is a huge, obviously, Chinese mobile app, and they do everything from, obviously, retail all the way to business. You can do everything in the app. You can, book a doctor's appointment. You can pay your groceries. You can pay bills, everything. I think Southeast Asia is very similar to that. They have a lot of these things that are called super apps, right? And I think having that ability for Lightning to be integrated into, whether it be just the app itself that does Lightning, will supercharge a lot of the stuff that we do today. And what I mean by that is, because Lightning is obviously like open source, and anyone who can plug into Lightning will have this ability and be, obviously open to everyone who's plugged into it. But what I look at it as, the analogy I call it is kind of, Lightning gives you wings, which is kind of like the Red Bull effect, right? Is that if any app is able to go and implement Lightning, it now has the legs to go move out of that particular country. So for example, Momo here is quite a large app that's very similar to WeChat, but it's stuck here in Vietnam. It can't move anywhere. It can only do local payments. It can only do things that are local to Vietnam. But imagine if when integrated Lightning Network, you can now take mobile and move out to any country you'd want. So you can go to Germany, you can go to the UK, you can go to the US, and you can instantly pay, a Lightning QR code, and they would just deduct the VND balance of whatever is being sent. So obviously, like, if they were using Neutronpay, they can plug in through our integration. We would just pay the stats equivalent, and then whatever that forex is between VND to stats, we would just deduct the VND. And so you can see how that would kind of integrate to all other apps across the world, or in whatever countries have those apps, is if they implemented the Lightning Network, everyone would just be interoperable. And so now you have that access to, whatever millions of people. Like for example, if you look at, when Cash App implemented the Lightning Network, that's now access to 80 million users that they have on that platform. And so we can now transact to Neutronpay today, to Cash App today. So Vietnamese people that use Neutronpay can literally just call up their cousins and say, hey, I want to send you some money. Can you buy me something, or can you exchange some money for me? I'll send it to you in Cash App, and Cash App will just give them USD dollars. And so you can see how that kind of starts moving quite quickly to other apps and saying, hey, if these guys are on it, and there's 80 million people here, maybe say, for example, Robinhood gets onto it, and Robinhood has, I think like 40 to 60 million users. And then that just kind of keeps compounding over and over. And whatever other apps that are using it across the world will start picking that up as well, and they'll just start integrating Lightning into the thing. So that's why I call it, when they integrate Lightning, it's kind of like giving the app wings, and now you can move it globally while still keeping your brand in focus. Because now, say locally, if you're a Momo user and you go to the US, that person is now maybe more proud to show that I'm a Momo user from Vietnam because it's an actual Vietnamese app, but I'm able to transact globally.
So I'm curious where you see any of the challenges. Is it a technical hurdle, or is it a volatility hurdle? Where are some of the challenges that you've seen when you're trying to get adoption there?
I think it's, I don't think a lot of people like the way that kind of we've approached it in a way, because we're more of a custodial service, right? So we do a lot of the KYC, KYB stuff, and a lot of people don't like that word, but it's our approach to like how we feel like we're gonna enable the next kind of like, billion people to come onto Lightning, right? It's the easiest, fastest way to get people in without kind of bombarding them and saying it's Bitcoin and it's Lightning, right? So we try to make it as easy as possible. And that's kind of how we've approached it. And because if I believe if we approach it the other way, where it's more without making it very seamless for the user, meaning like making them comfortable for what they see, then they're more willing to use it. And so that's where our approach was, kind of making it more custodial focused, more relatable to the actual end user. And so when they do get onto it, we can kind of implement these features to them, showing like why they would use Lightning, why maybe if they wanted to do kind of the other Bitcoin features like on-chain, and why they wanted to go to kind of like a hardware wallet, why they want to do self-custodial items that they want to do. So that's kind of how we looked at it, and that was kind of only the challenge where we saw if we didn't do it that way and we did it more of the non-custodial way, not that it's anything against it, because at heart, I'm a Bitcoin maximalist, and I really, really want to have all the non-custodial stuff and everything else where we kind of like raha, and we're kind of like, we're the ones that are gonna move the banking system completely out. But in today's world, like we work with banks today, right? We work with things that we do today. Everyone pays bills, everyone has bank accounts and everything that we fund into. And so if we can work seamlessly with the banking partners, and if we can work with regulators to figure out, hey, how can we work together with this? I think as soon as we do that, it's giving us a spotlight and a chair at the table. And if we have a chair at the table, then we can change people's minds, right? So we're not doing an uphill battle, we're doing an actual battle that we're trying to change people's minds or politicians' minds to say, hey, this isn't that bad, this is how it should be enforced, and maybe you can dial down the KYC, KYB stuff, because not everyone is a bad actor, right? Everyone just wants to be able to process payments. And so that's kind of how we've approached it, and hopefully that hasn't caused enough friction to get people on.
I'm curious how you deal with the volatility question for, because maybe some of us are very comfortable with the Bitcoin volatility because, we've been here for a while or we're ideologically committed. How do you deal with that for somebody who is not so willing to deal with that volatility?
Yeah, so that's kind of how we did our model, is that we said that we're liable for all the volatility, we'll take it on. So whatever price that you see, and that's why within our app, you'll just see the currency. You'll just see VND. So if they load up VND, the only time that it's actually being sent is if they confirmed it. So meaning that if they scanned like a Lightning QR code, we're the ones who are going to be sending that amount of Satoshis. And so if it does fall, we're the ones who are going to be losing on that trade. So we're going to be the ones that are like, if we have to pay more because the price has dropped and we have to pay more Satoshis, that would be us, that would be on us. But the actual end customer will actually get exactly what they're gonna be paid for, or what they're paying for, or what they're receiving. So they'll never lose on that, and that's why that's our model that we're trying to approach to kind of the end users for our mobile app side, is that you don't have to worry about like the Bitcoin price volatility. We'll worry about that for you, but we wanna make sure that the payment that you're trying to send globally, wherever it may be, is that we'll handle that volatility for you. So we'll handle all the dips, we'll handle all the losses. It's just that we want to make sure that the value that you get is what you're expecting when you're using a Lightning network. Right.
So in this example, if they invoice 100,000 VND, that equivalent amount of sats is the amount they're getting. And then I guess the other aspect is how much of because obviously you want to give the nice experience for the customers, how much of the actual Bitcoin technical side is being exposed to them? I mean, if they have an on-chain withdrawal, or like how much of the Bitcoin technical stuff is getting exposed for them?
So the only really that's getting exposed is just the addressing. So they'll see the addresses either for on-chain or for Lightning. So we have both options. Obviously our default is Lightning, and so they'll see the address there, and the on-chain address if they want to flip over to it. And that's the most amount that we want to expose to them. It's just the QR codes and the string of, whether it be a Lightning invoice or an on-chain address.
Also curious your thoughts around, so coming back to that question around stability, we're seeing different approaches there, right? So some people are talking about whether it's Tether and stablecoins, or whether it's, Taro RGB style, or whether it's Bitcoin Beach Wallet with stable sats. I'm curious how you're seeing that question. Like, is it something you'd be looking at, or are you more just happy to stay with Bitcoin and then just natively have Bitcoin or Lightning, but also have, let's say, VND in the banking side?
Yeah, like from a subjective side, I'd love it just to have just pure Bitcoin, and we just have a Bitcoin circular economy. And so we would create, just everyone transacting in Bitcoin, everyone transacting in stats, and just paying for services that way. Objectively, I like the projects that are being worked, like RGB, Taro, I guess the name's being changed, and like whatever Synonym's doing as well for some of the token-based stuff. We're probably going to implement that as well, just because the demand for, I hate to say it, but like stable coins is always going to be a factor, right? And people want to have the ability to have USDT or USDC, and if RGB is able to provide that, we'll implement it into our services as well to provide that value add back to the customer so that they have the option. Because I think when we're running at a Neutronpay, we have to be very obviously open-minded and kind of making sure that we're listening to their customers and what they want. And most of what we've seen is they're happy with what they're transacting with, but from a digital standpoint, if they are able to get the stable coins on Lightning, they'd prefer that a little bit more over Bitcoin.
In terms of countries, can you spell out a little bit? Obviously, we've mentioned Vietnam and Canada because, for obvious reasons. What are the other countries that you're looking to expand the service into?
There's quite a few. So we want to first focus on Southeast Asia and Asia itself. So like South Korea, Japan, Indonesia, Thailand are kind of the main, and the Philippines is kind of the main kind of areas that we want to focus on. And that would be more of just the payout segments, right? So being able to pay out within Asia and Southeast Asia. And then eventually we want to be able to have the deposits where we can locally take the users as well. And so right now we only have obviously Canada, US, and Vietnam, but eventually we want to enable all these other countries that I just mentioned so that we can tie in with what we support outbound, but also doing inbound as well. And so hopefully that would be Q2, Q3 that we would have the list of those countries enabled, and then so you'd be able to download it, say if you're in South Korea, and you can do deposit or withdrawal, and the same thing in like Indonesia, you'd be able to do deposit and withdrawal.
And I understand you were also looking at some countries in South America also, or?
Yeah. So we've had a partnership with a company called LSI, and so we're powering the infrastructure for them to be able to provide Lightning to the Colombian residents there and users that they have. And so that would able to have them do kind of the same model that we're doing. So it would be Colombian currency that they would see, but they would be receiving Bitcoin Lightning in or out. And so that would be, if it was received in, they'd automatically get Colombian currency, and they'd see that reflectively, and then they'd be able to send that out to anyone that's receiving the Lightning Network.
We're also starting to see, in the US, we're seeing challenges against some of the banking providers for Bitcoin or crypto companies. I'm curious how you're seeing that. Is that going to be a challenge, sort of retaining fiat banking access?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think from being here, I think Southeast Asia is a little bit more open to having those discussions, where I think the US is a little bit more certain on, they just want to control everything and kind of hamper everything down through tight regulation and controls. I don't think Southeast Asia is that certain yet. I think they see the innovation, they see the change. And the only reason why I say that is because a lot of the Southeast Asian countries that already have these apps are already on a digital stance, right? So if you look over like South Korea, Vietnam, China especially, right? It's like we already have these QR codes that everyone's already transacting digitally. So for them to kind of say, we're not gonna do that, and we're gonna completely push out, say, just Lightning or Bitcoin in general, I think they understand that would be almost like taking a step back. And I could be wrong on this, but just kind of how I see it is, I don't think they're that naive to believe that we can do it ourselves and that they're going to issue a central backed digital currency. I think they're going to do it either way, but I think the smart play is that they'll do central backed digital currencies along with a play with like Bitcoin as kind of like another opportunity to bring the market segment in. They may look at it as, we'll have central backed digital currencies, but maybe Bitcoin, they'll be able to get the people in, or they'll make us do all the hard work, and then they'll be able to convince them to go over to central backed digital currencies. I think that's what would be kind of what they're thinking. But obviously, as all of us here, I think it's the other way around. It's like when we have the Bitcoin and we have the ability to do it, I think a lot of people will start moving away from the central backed digital currencies over to Bitcoin. And the analogy I use to that is, everyone that's here is probably remember the 2000s, right? And I use this analogy a lot, and some people think it's wrong, but I think it's the intranet versus the internet. And we all know who won that battle, right? And so we're just doing this cycle again over in the same context, is that the intranet is the central bank digital currencies, and they think this is the best thing for everyone, and we can build this, and we know better than everyone else. Whereas the internet, which is Bitcoin, is like, we don't have to say a whole lot. We just know it works. This is the right way of doing it. Everyone's open about it, and we're just building on it every time. And the product will speak for itself. And I think it already has done for the last 14 years, and I think we'll see that as it just keeps continuing along. And so keeping that analogy that's what makes me very bullish on kind of what we're doing in Lightning and kind of in Neutronpay, is that at the end of the day, whether how much regulation comes in, how much they press it down, it's gonna win at the end. And so whatever that looks like, making them change their regulation or licensing, I think that's what's gonna happen eventually as the years go on.
And speaking of the whole Bitcoin competing with CBDC's question, or at least existing as this parallel alternative, it'll be interesting given the whole remittance idea, right? So let's say Canada has it, maybe advance a few years down the line. Canada has a CBDC, Vietnam has a CBDC. Are they going to interoperate? Who's going to help, swap between them? And it may also be coming to the same analogy with internet versus intranet. Bitcoin might be, well, it will be more frictionless in terms of international. So maybe that's another angle or a differentiating factor for Bitcoin compared to, let's say, a Canadian CBDC trying to interact with the Vietnamese CBDC.
Yeah. Like, I think there's always going to be these bridges, right? And I hate to say it because those bridges are just horrible, right? But you're right. Like, I think there's going to be these central bank digital currencies that are not going to play nice with each other, and there's always going to be this middle person that's going to say, do you want Canadian central bank digital currency for VND Dong central bank digital currency? How we play in that market segment, I think, is also going to play on Bitcoin, because everything's digital. So whether they issue that a portion, or if a person is a liquidity provider or a market maker, they'll probably take a portion of those CBCs, and I hate to say, we see it all the time, is they'll do it as an IOU, and they'll start trying to sell that into the market of Bitcoin and say, do you want to buy this so you can go and transact in Canada, or do you want to buy this so you can transact in Vietnam or the US or Singapore? So I think that's going to start happening, but I believe that's going to happen all on Bitcoin. It's just the problem is that we're going to get maybe some of these bad agent actors that issue these IOUs, and it's going to be problems, because then that also gives Bitcoin a bad name, because they think that Bitcoin is the one that's been enabling us and doing this, which it's an open protocol, right? And so whether good things happen on it, it's we're enabling people to be able to make those decisions, right? Whether they be good or bad, and I think that's what happens when people start figuring out, okay, maybe the central bank digital currency isn't good for me, and they just eventually will just sell everything and just go back to Bitcoin.
So we've only got a couple minutes left. Let's talk about what makes you bullish on Bitcoin and Lightning over the next few years. Is there anything in particular that you're excited for in the world of Lightning over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think the developments just from all the protocol developers like LND, Async, and Core Lightning are bringing huge advancements to kind of the Lightning segment. I think as soon as we see, I think LND is coming out with version 16 that would have Taro, but it's kind of stalled. But just kind of the other implements and features that we could have on Lightning is really bullish for me. I think making it more usable for kind of the general aspect of users and whoever wants to be kind of like a node operator makes it very appealing. There is challenges obviously to be the node operator and to run Lightning, but I think as soon as it starts getting more developed and a little bit easier, we'll have more people that want to be a part of that network, and I think that's what makes me more excited, because then you have people that are actually taking the time out of their day, wanting to read and figure out how to build their own nodes, connect with the network, expanding it a lot further. And so we'll see the combination of, obviously there'll be businesses like myself, but also a bunch of other people that want to open nodes and support the network. And I think that's what gets me really excited, because the more people that kind of get into the network, it's, as Elizabeth Stark says, is like, we want to get as many people as we can on the Lightning network, and that's what's really exciting. So regardless if you're a user of Lightning or you're a Lightning node operator, everything counts, everyone works together, and if we all work together in kind of this space, it just makes everything a lot better. And so when that message is clearly brought and things happen like that, a lot of innovation happens, a lot of features happen, and just everyone kind of working together makes it all pretty well.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of like if you imagine early days of email or things like this, right? Like you might in the early days think, oh, who can I email? Not that many people have email. It's the same idea with Lightning, right? How many other people are on Lightning? How many people can speak Lightning, right? Take a Lightning payment. How many people, maybe have some Bitcoin but have never used Lightning, or have like altcoins and have never used Lightning? So I think, but we are starting to see more and more people, Lightning penetration is increasing over time. It's a slow but steady process, as I see it. So let's see where it goes. And we've got time for questions? Yeah.
5 minutes.
All right, so hands up for questions if anyone's got a question.
Not everybody at the same time. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the input. I was just wondering, you were saying like the Neutronpay and that you're like a Bitcoin maximalist and so, and what I see at the moment in general here in Vietnam or in Asia is a strong tendency towards like fully custodial, like what Neutronpay is, fully custodial, all KYC, marriage with banks. And I was wondering, okay, sure, on one hand you can do the argument that this is pushing towards adoption quicker, but on the other hand, I am wondering, are there any attempts to go towards like, I don't know, maybe integrating trustless stable sets at some point, or do have an educational part integrated where you're pushing users, or what means pushing, but educating and asking them to pull their funds onto non-custodial wallets or so, because also from a regulatory perspective, I mean, you can easily be shut down and yeah. So what does it mean for you? What are the values of Bitcoin maximalism and Bitcoin per se?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, you brought up a lot of good stuff, because what in our product roadmap and line in the next, I think in 5 and 10 year segments is that, you're exactly right, is what we want to do is that we're going to have eventually a Neutronpay is, I think 5 or so years from now on, is that we'll have a particular side of the business that will just be all non-custodial, which is we will tell people to move over to non-custodial, meaning that, obviously you store all your things here, but as soon as you move to this side, we can't help you. But we will provide the education as much as you can to understand why you want to do this, right? And so that has always been our goal, is moving as many people as onto Bitcoin as much as possible, providing the education, and then telling them eventually you have to go on your own. So it's almost kind of nurturing kind of like a kid from birth, and then saying, wow, you're a teenager, now you can do your things on your own. And we want to provide these services eventually. I think probably, I say 5 years, but it could be a little bit sooner. But we want to make sure that people are comfortable with doing obviously non-custodial things, because right now, obviously the non-custodial aspect of it is there's a lot of people that lose their keys, or they're not storing it properly. And I think that it comes down to your point too, is making sure that we have the right education that we're providing to our users. And we want to be able to make sure that that's there. And so we are building kind of the educational list. We will have non-custodial services to move it over. But we want to give that choice to the people, right? So again, we don't want to force people to say, from my subjective opinion, I don't want to force someone to say, you have to do this. This is the option here. And we're going to provide you with the best amount of documentation and education to make you make that decision. And it's going to be there for you. And so some people will like to obviously have custodial services because of maybe they don't want to manage it, and that's fine. But we'd rather say, we'd probably recommend them to say, just do non-custodial.
Got time for 2 more questions. 2 more questions to the crowd. There we go. We got a gentleman over here in the blue shirt. The future node operator.
Yeah. I was wondering, when are you guys gonna come to Thailand?
Hopefully soon. Again, it's all about kind of rules and regulation, and as long as our compliance department says it's okay. So we are looking to kind of talk a little bit Thailand. Thailand has been a little bit more open now. Before it was very, very closed down. But I think them opening up, it's funny, them opening up cannabis has now opened up a couple of other things. And so they've been a little bit more open to the idea for Bitcoin in general. And so as soon as that is kind of completed on our compliance side, they say it's okay. We'll probably start opening in Thailand pretty soon.
I hope that you or that they can convince them, because recently they went the other way. They said basically we don't want you to use Bitcoin payments in Thailand. They shut down Bitrefill. So any small thing that stays under the radar is okay. But as soon as you're an official corporation and say like, yeah, we have this orange coin, then they have historically said no. So is there any, like, is it like you asking really nicely, or is it like, well, we have all these users here, you're gonna make so much money?
No, it's more or less, it's the same thing kind of how like we've come into Vietnam was kind of the same thing, right? Is for us, we love the orange, we love Bitcoin, but from like regulatory standpoint, as soon as you mention Bitcoin, they don't like that, right? But if you convert it properly into a way of saying, the transaction that's happening, yes, it's on Bitcoin, but the end user that's going to receive it is going to be in Thai baht. So they're never receiving Bitcoin, right? And the way we look at that is, some people may look at that as, oh, you're not really doing anything Bitcoin, but we are doing something in Bitcoin, right? Because actually we've crossed through the first door, right? Meaning that they've allowed us to come in. And so we're servicing what they want to hear, is saying that you will be servicing through the currency, you will be getting Thai baht, right? And I think that just makes people happier than saying we're receiving Bitcoin. Because at the end of the day, no country wants to be undermined. They don't want to say, I'm losing my currency to another, say, form of payment. And that's just for every country, right? It's just saying, you shouldn't be able to come into my country and start using some other form of currency. And it's the same thing in Vietnam, and the same thing in any other country, is like, you can't come in here and just say, hey, I'm going to start using US dollars instead of VND. Right, that's kind of offensive. So they'll just say, I need you to convert that from USD to VND. And so that's how we've kind of positioned ourselves to say, we will always follow the local authorities on how they want to receive it. And most of that has been through as long as it's received through currency, we'll do the liquidation and conversion into Thai baht. And whatever how they want to tax it is exactly how they do it today. So it's kind of, there's no extra legwork for you, but all the work is on us. And we'll be able to provide you all the information and everything else and the educational things that we've learned to give you the actual expertise, so that when you want to enable Bitcoin, we can advise you on the right way. And so that's how we look at it, and hopefully, Thailand looks at that as a very positive sign, and their lawyers and whoever else that can talk to their politicians and say, yeah, sure, we'll let you guys in as long as you guys do the liquidation, and the end recipient will always get Thai baht for now. And then as years go along, again, we'll do some whispers in the ear and say, maybe you can enable stats. It's not so bad. Maybe it's a little portion, right? It doesn't have to be right away full 100%, but maybe we say, could we start with 10%? Could we allow them to have 10% in stats, and then the rest of it, 90% in Thai baht?
All right, good question, good answer. Let's give them a round of applause, guys.